Alright, I'm making this video just as a little talk or rant or ramble or whatever about hand drill fires and why the hand drill is just, my preferred way to make a fire, pros and cons of it, when not to try it, when to try it, and whatever comes up. I might not stick to those topics, who knows. Either way, it's going to be about making fire with a hand drill. So, with me right here, I've got 4 hand drill sets that I've made from materials I've gathered in the area I'm at right now. Here in Kansas, about a quarter mile from a creek, in a little juniper grove with a bunch of cottonwoods. Pretty typical for this area. So, the hand drill sets I have here with me are, 3 of them are the same material combination, and 1 is different. So I'll show you the different one first. So, all of these spindles are horseweed. They're all pretty decently straight. A couple of them are pretty long, which is pretty nice. You don't always get the nice long spindles. In fact, it's hard to find nice long spindles in a lot of areas. So finding these good ones is pretty nice. So, the spindles are horseweed. And this fireboard is a juniper root, or eastern red cedar root. Eastern red cedar is in the juniper family. It's a type of juniper, not an actual true cedar. The name is a bit of a misnomer. The wood is very hard to make friction fire with, oftentimes. The branch wood and trunk wood, anyway. But the root is fairly soft. It behaves very similarly to cottonwood branch in terms of its density and ease of use. This one was my first time ever using juniper root, and I like it. It's not my favorite material in the world, but it is pretty decent. One interesting thing is getting the burn-in on this was actually kind of challenging. The spindle walked around a little bit. It didn't want to sit right away, so it burned a little bit funky at first, but then it worked out in the end. One nice thing about juniper root is because it is slightly denser than a lot of other materials that I typically use, is I can get multiple fires from one spot. So I've still probably got 2, maybe 3 more coals in that one spot alone, meaning this board potentially could last quite a few fires. I've got a couple hair ties on here. I like to keep my sets together. I like to use the same spindle on the same fireboard rather than switching to different fireboards with different spindles all the time. No real reason to it other than I just like I just like to have everything matching up that way. I feel like it's kind of weird to see a bunch of different size holes on a fireboard, at least for my own sets. So, anyway, horseweed on juniper root. These other 3 are all horseweed on cottonwood root. Cottonwood root is my preferred fireboard material for hand drill. There are other materials that are great, other materials that work really well, might even be a little easier than cottonwood root, but it is my preference, just due to my experiences with it. One thing I particularly like about cottonwood root is oftentimes, as opposed to say yucca, just your other standard hand drill fireboards, yucca, sotol, sometimes cedar, different branch woods. You can find cottonwood root in really large diameter pieces, like soup can and bigger. Isn't that hard to find? And you can make a lot of fires out of a nice wide board. If you have a board that is narrower, that's totally fine, but obviously because it is a narrower board, you're not going to be able to necessarily make fires up both sides like you can on a wide board like this. For example, the juniper root board, it's fairly wide. However, I'm probably not going to be making 2 straight lines up each side. Whereas with my cottonwood root fireboard here, for example, I can easily go up both sides and not have any problems with it, because this board is pretty wide. So one thing worth noting, cottonwood, along with any other wood, depending on when you gather it, will have variations in its density. This cottonwood root is fairly soft. This one is a little bit firmer, and this one is a little middle ground between the other two. They are all fantastic. They all work really well. One thing with this one, because it's the softer of the three, is I have to use a little bit less pressure. Otherwise, I will burn straight through my holes. That's what this one, and this one all were. I was using too much pressure on them. These first two were lighter pressure, and I got coal successfully from those spots. I think I had a coal successfully out of this one as well, but it was the second attempt with it that burned right through. I can't remember. In any case, cottonwood root is fantastic. Horseweed is fantastic. Let's talk about spindle sizes. This spindle is nice and long and very straight. The only bit of curve to it is right up here at the top end. This spindle goes from my fingertips all the way to my armpit when my arm is fully stretched out. This is, in my mind, an ideal spindle. It is a good diameter, being about as thick as my pinky. It is great length, being that fingertip to armpit, meaning you can make a whole lot of rotations before you get all the way to the bottom. And, I mean, all the way to the bottom. I stop about 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way down, typically. I don't know anyone that goes all the way to the very bottom of a spindle, but if you were to do so, you'd be able to get a ton of rotations. This could be a 2-pass spindle, potentially, with the right set and the right technique. I'm going to have this spindle for a long time, or at least I hope I am, because I really, really like it. One nice thing about horseweed is all these little nodes here are leaf nodes. There were leaves growing all the way up this stalk. Now, that gives it a little bit of texture, makes it a little bit bumpy. And once you scrape down the sharp bit that's left from the leaf nodes after you remove the leaves, it gives you a nice grippy texture. It's not going to be slipping in your hands, as opposed to something like, say, seep willow or, I don't know, let's say yucca might slip. I've never needed to use any extra moisture, tackiness, or anything with a horseweed spindle. Horseweed is a plant that grows very, very commonly all across the country. I'm in the Midwest. I've seen it in the South, in the Southwest. I'm sure it grows up in the North as well. In fact, another name is Canadian fleabane. So that would lead me to believe it probably grows in northern regions, such as Canada, as well. So, horseweed, if you can find a good piece, will make a fantastic hand drill spindle. And that's why, again, I'm recommending a horseweed on cottonwood root set. On a couple of these, I have a coal catch, just banded to it with the hair ties. I don't typically carry a coal catch, just not as a rule or anything. I just don't typically do it because I can always find something that'll work. But it can be nice to have something ready to go so you don't have to go searching around or whatever for a coal catch. So the ones that I have on this set and this one too, yeah, all three of these just have a little piece of Osage orange, little just chips from an atlatl that I made. Coal catch is one of the least important things in my mind for someone making friction fire. Its sole purpose is to have somewhere for the dust to pile up on, that it won't be extinguished from the cold or from the wet, and it needs to be sturdy enough not to buckle under the pressure of the fireboard and not to fall apart or burn up when there's a coal on it. It could be a lot of things. You're not going to want to use plastic wrap for a coal catch. That obviously isn't going to go very well, but you can use a ton of things, chips of bark, chips of wood, rocks, your knife, whatever. There are a lot of possibilities for that. There are also ways you can cut your notch in your fireboard to mitigate the need for a coal catch. But that's not what this video is about. So, why hand drill? Why rub two sticks together in an era where we have instant fire in the form of lighters and matches and spark-based ignition sources like ferro rods, or even flint and steel for that matter? Well, that's a good point. Those are all much more convenient and much easier. Even the bow drill is more easy to use for a beginner, easier to get fire with oftentimes than a hand drill. So why hand drill? Well, for me, it just feels right. I don't really know how else to word it, but it feels good to me. I like that I can connect with the earth better with a hand drill, in that I don't need any modern materials to make one. I can find a rock, break said rock into a somewhat sharp edge, cut my spindle piece, find a piece of root or branch of a cottonwood tree or yucca or whatever, and split it down with, again, said rock, and have a functional hand drill set with very little work, really. It doesn't take much to make a hand drill, whereas, say, a bow drill, you need cordage. Well, okay, sure, most people wear shoes. Most people wear shoes that have laces. A shoelace or bootlace can make a pretty decent cord for a bow drill. I have a paracord lanyard on my knife here. That works very well. Paracord is my preferred bowstring for bow drill fire making. If you don't have that modern string or that modern cordage, bow drill gets a lot harder. If you have to make your cordage with, say, milkweed or dogbane or hemp or whatever fibers you have available to you, it's going to be much more difficult to use that to make a string that is strong enough for a bow drill. Just with the amount of pressure and tension that string is under, a lot of natural materials, even if it's a strong cord that you can't snap just by pulling on it, it might break pretty quickly when used with a bow drill, just because of the repeated pressure and friction and tension and rubbing and the stick heating up against the string and the string rubbing against itself. And there's a reason most survival schools and bushcraft instructors teach with paracord. If you're going to bow drill, especially if you're going to bow drill a lot, you don't want to have to be relying on primitive cordage. Now, you can get by with rawhide cord or buckskin cord. That'll work fine as long as you're careful with it. But again, cordage is an extra thing that you might not have. Another thing to consider is a socket. Socket sounds like it would be pretty easy. It's just something to put on top of your bow drill spindle to hold everything in place and apply pressure to generate your friction as you're spinning with your bow. Pretty simple concept. Not always the easiest thing to find or make. It's very easy to make a socket. It's not always easy to make a socket that works well. What I mean by that is you can grab any piece of wood, drill a little hole in it with your knife, and use it as a socket. Not any piece of wood is going to work well. I am not trying to poo on anyone's bow drill love or anything. I'm just trying to point out a few things that can be problematic with it. So, a socket. If you can find a good ankle bone for a deer or an elk or a cow, those work pretty well. In fact, my phone is set up on top of an ammo can right now, and in that ammo can I have a little deer ankle bone. They work pretty well. It's a really good hard material. It's not going to burn up very quickly like a wooden socket could. It's pretty awesome. My preferred socket is made from a small piece of deer antler. My favorite socket that I've ever had. I've had good stone sockets, good wood sockets, good bone sockets, but that piece of antler, by far my favorite socket. And it's pretty small. It fits easily just in the palm of my hand. And I've had other people try to use it and they didn't like it because of how small it was, thought it was awkward. That's fine. But the socket is one part of the bow drill that can be somewhat challenging if you don't have one that you're already carrying with you. Wooden sockets will work. They're fine. They will generate friction on top of your spindle. It will wear down the top of your spindle quickly. One way you can try to get around that is by using some kind of lubricant, chapstick, crushed up plant matter in it, a little bit of sap. You could use a piece of pitchwood from a pine tree, just a spot where the pine tree sent all of its sap when it, or not all, but a lot of sap when it was damaged or when it fell over or whatever. If you're not familiar with that wood, pitchwood, it is fantastic stuff for fire making. You can use it as a socket. It's not my favorite. I feel like it kind of sticks a little bit because as it heats up, it is self-lubricating, but that lubricant is sap, it is sticky. And so it can work. It's not my favorite. But with a hand drill set, you don't have any of those issues because you are spinning one stick into another stick with just your hands. You're not going to have to worry about manufacturing cordage. You're not going to have to worry about making a socket that will work well. Your hands and arms and shoulders and back do the work. Bow drill does have a mechanical advantage. It can be easier. In fact, it is much easier in most cases for most people. I like bow drill. I do. I like hand drill a little bit more. So, why use hand drill when we have matches? Matches can get wet. Even a stormproof match doesn't light up every single time. And once a match does start to burn, you've only got a few seconds to get that burning match to, burn up your fire lay, your tinder, your kindling. If you don't have your fire lay perfectly set, you're going to go through a few matches before you get anything to actually catch and stick and burn. Same deal with lighters. Lighters can fail. They can run out of butane, or if you have a lighter that takes different fluids, whatever, but they can run out. And once it's out, it's basically a tiny little ferro rod. Good in theory. Hard to use if you're not using perfect tinder. Because those sparks, while they are really hot, are very small and focused in one tiny area. And say you fall on your lighter and you crack it and all the fluid leaks out. Are you really going to want to try to fiddle with that little spark? Or, in a survival situation or an emergency, definitely fiddle with the sparks. But if you're just doing this for practice because you enjoy the craft, like I do, I don't see much point in using a lighter. Ferro rod. This is the hard one for me because I really like ferro rods. No matter how good at friction fire I consider myself to be, I will always carry a ferro rod. I've got one on my knife sheath right here. Ferro rods are very convenient. You can start thousands of fires potentially with a small ferro rod like this. You can use it in any weather. It can be fully soaking wet. It could be freezing outside, snowing, dumping rain, 100 degrees, super humid. Doesn't matter, ferro rod will work. They're great. Ferro rods are one of the greatest assets to a wilderness skills practitioner. I like them. I will not say that a hand drill is a substitute for a ferro rod, or vice versa. The use of a ferro rod versus friction fire comes down to preference and necessity a lot of the time. One or the other. I will choose friction fire most of the time. Probably 80% of the time I will go with friction fire either by hand drill or bow drill before I even consider using a ferro rod. I just prefer that. I know people that will practice their hand drill or bow drill once or twice a year and be satisfied and use ferro rods and matches for every other fire. And that's fine too. It's whatever you want to do. So, this is a lot of random scatterbrained ranting. Very much shows my ADD, jumping topic to topic and having a hard time putting my thoughts into words. But you're probably tired of talking, or listening to me talk rather. So let's talk about a little bit more, and then I will show myself making fire with a hand drill. So the last topic I'm going to talk about before we get into the fun stuff is tinder. In the area that I am at right now, I am surrounded by, or not surrounded, there's a bunch, but not like a ton, but there's eastern red cedar, which again is a type of juniper. If you've ever worked with juniper trees, you will know that a lot of them have good bark for tinder. I have a whole bunch just off camera here. And this stuff makes fantastic tinder bundles. It's easy to process, you can gather it en masse pretty easily without harming the tree. I mean, like, don't strip a tree of its outer bark, but as long as you're not cutting the tree, as long as you're just carefully peeling it off, it's not going to hurt it. It also has a pretty decently reliable ignition. Once it gets burning, so long as your tinder bundle is made well, you're not going to just put it out right away. It will smolder. Even once the active flame is gone, that bundle can burn for quite a while. An alternative tinder source is dry grass. I'm at a public campground right now, and this area actually gets mowed. These are grass clippings from being mowed. It rained here yesterday, so there's a little bit of moisture in this. It's not bad though, it'd still be totally usable. If this bundle was 100% dry, it would go up in flame very easily with a coal. Even easier with matches or a lighter, a ferro rod. Dry grass is a great source for tinder. It's entirely up to you what you want to use. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. Another good tinder source is the cambium layer of the cottonwood tree. Cottonwood bark is already very fibrous, very easy to fluff, very easy to make a good tinder bundle with, very easy to ignite with whatever ignition source you choose. So I'm going to be building a small fire so I can cook myself some dinner out here, and then I will probably end the video at that point. But for now, let's go ahead and make a tinder bundle, and then I will hand drill, and we can have some potatoes, because that's what dinner is going to be. I found some potatoes out here from whoever was here last, so I'm having potatoes for dinner. So I'm going to make my tinder bundle with the juniper bark. I've got a whole bunch here. Some is already fairly fibrous, some is not. So I'm going to grab the stuff that's already decently fluffy. Put all the stiffer bark that would need more processing off to the side. Typically when I make tinder bundles, I like to do it over something to catch all the very fine particulates, all the really soft, fluffy dust and fibers that are coming off of it as I go. I'm not going to do that right now, mainly just because I don't really have anything I want to use for that. And it's not really that big a deal when you're using good juniper bark like this. It'll fluff up really well. You don't necessarily need the dust. So, making a tinder bundle, I get a wad of bark and fold it up a couple times. When I get it folded, I grab it in both hands and grind it against itself. You can just do back and forth, you can do circles, whatever you want to do. The goal is just to soften the bark and make it fluffy and fine. And as you can see, it's already shredding up really nicely. I'm just going to do that a couple times, fold, grind it, fold, grind it, until I'm satisfied with it. If it doesn't look soft enough that a bird would lay an egg in it, it's not going to be as good as it could be. You can get away with crappy tinder bundles. It can oftentimes be a lot more work than if you were to take the time to process it well. You might have to use a couple coals, which can be pretty exhausting for your arms, your back, your hands, whatever. So processing your tinder well the first time is very important. And you can see just all the dust coming off of this. This is good, dry bark. If there's moisture in it, it's still doable depending on how much moisture there is, but it will be harder. So if your bark isn't getting dusty like this when you process it, maybe try to find some that's a little bit drier. Alright, so this is getting nice and fine and fluffy. And there's a car about to drive by, so pardon the noise. But I'm now starting to just shape this into a little nest, a little ball. Making sure to keep the middle of it all very soft and fine materials. You don't want anything super coarse in the middle of your bundle. So this is looking pretty good. Last thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take another strip of bark. I just got bit by an ant or something. That didn't feel great. I'm going to take another strip of bark. Make sure it's fairly pliable. And I'm just going to wrap my tinder bundle. Why am I wrapping it? Well, I'm wrapping it because with the way that I like to bring my tinder bundle to flames, being waving in figure eights, it just holds it together a little bit better. I'm not wrapping it super tight. I don't need it to be super tight, it just needs to hold. So again, once I've got it wrapped, I'm going to go in with my thumbs and just open it up a little bit. Open up my target area right in the middle. So, right in here is where I'm going to drop my coal. I'm going to set this off to the side, not directly on the ground. Like I said, it did just rain here the other day, yesterday, so I don't want to have a lot of moisture getting into my set, or my fire set, or my tinder bundle. So, we'll go ahead and use this set, just because I love this nice long spindle. So, this hole is fully used. It's all the way down to the bottom. It's not through the bottom, but there's not enough left to reliably get a coal. So we're going to start a new hole. So, using the tip of our knife, we're going to give some space from the last hole. So not directly on top of it, not right next to it. We're giving it a little bit of space. About half an inch or quarter inch or so. Doesn't have to be much. We're going to take the tip of our knife and drill a small depression into the board. A small divot. It doesn't have to be much, it just has to accept the tip of your spindle, tip of the drill. You don't want to make it too deep either. If you make it deep, you're wasting material, and why would you want to waste such a prime material like cottonwood root? It's just weird. So, got a little hole dug out here. So now, I'm going to just go ahead and burn it in. I'll go ahead and bring my phone down so that you can see this, or maybe not with all this grass, but actually, I'm going to pause the video and grab a blanket or something so that I can have just a flatter surface so you're able to see a little bit better. Be right back. Alright, we're back. So, I'm going to show the burn-in process now. Just a second ago, we went ahead and started a new hole. Drilled a pilot hole with the tip of the knife. So now, we're just burning in. For the burn-in, we don't need to exert ourselves a ton. We're just spinning, warming it up, getting that hole shaped to the tip of the spindle. So right now I'm not using a ton of speed, not using a ton of pressure, just running my hands down, stop, reset my hands at the top, and go again. After this pass, I will go ahead and increase my pressure and my speed to get the hole to burn. Right now I'm just warming it up. So now I'll go ahead and use more pressure, more speed. Got a little smoke. We'll do one more pass. All right. So it is burned in now. So now I'm going to cut my notch. And let's see if I can get that mostly on camera here. So I'm going to first bisect the hole. So find the center point and make a mark on the front. That is roughly the center of my notch. I'm going to go off to either side and make another mark. Now I've got a guide. I'm not going to make it any wider than that. I'm going to keep it about that width at the front. And going in, it will taper just a little bit. I haven't decided if I'm going to make a square or triangle notch, so let's go with a square. So I'm going to bring my guide down the sides of my fireboard. Just, have a little bit of a template. Like that, nothing hard. And I'm going to start carving it out. I like to go from the top first. And cottonwood root is a nice soft material, so it carves pretty fast. Really just separating the fibers and popping out the chips. I'm not really doing any intensive carving. Just pushing in, popping them out. So, right now, my notch is triangular. I don't mind triangle notches, I'll use them. I prefer square notches because you get more contact between the spindle and your punk. So I'm going to go ahead and just square it up a little. So that's looking decent. And then I'm going to take the spine of my knife and rub it through the notch. And that's just going to smooth it down. It just gives the coal a little bit less chance of sticking. So, we've got a squarish notch. It still tapers in like it would for a triangle. I guess this one's a little bit more round than square, but either way. So, the last thing I'm going to do before I get started is I'm going to check to make sure that I'm going to get good contact. To do that, I'm going to put the spindle in the hole and look at it from the bottom of the fireboard. I want to see about a third of that spindle, almost half. And it's kind of hard to capture that on camera, but this is looking pretty good. So, I'm going to get my coal catch. Again, this is a chip of Osage. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. So there's a few different stances for hand drill. Sitting isn't my preferred stance, mainly because, as I explained in another video I posted, if you're sitting for your hand drilling, then all the effort is coming out of your arms and out of your shoulders. You have to do a lot of work with your arms and shoulders, and it can get pretty exhausting pretty fast. Alternatively, you can use a kneeling board, which is a stick that you pin under your knee or leg that holds down your fireboard for you so that you can bear down over the top of it. I find that to be very helpful. So I'm going to use one of my other fireboards, the juniper root, for this one, as a kneeling board. The only things that you have to worry about with a kneeling board is that it's going to actually hold down your fireboard and that it's not going to be super weak and snap. This juniper root, pretty sturdy, so I'm not worried about it. So I'm going to put it on my fireboard, wiggle it, just make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Put pressure on it, wiggle it more. That should be good. All right. So I'm holding it down with my knee. And it's not wanting to sit flat, which means my fireboard might not be super flat on the bottom. Or it could just be because the ground isn't necessarily even. Yeah, alright, so we're not going to use the kneeling board. If the ground isn't perfectly or mostly flat, kneeling board is pretty helpful. In this case, I will do it sitting, just because it is probably going to be the best stance for where I am right now. Don't mind the bottom of my foot. So, we're just going to start, again, with a couple light passes. We're just warming up the set. We're not doing anything intense, nothing crazy. We're not wearing ourselves out yet. We're just warming it up, starting to build a little pump. Getting a little wisp of smoke, not too much. Not trying for it though. So that's nice to see that starting to form already. Alright, after this pass I'm going to go a little bit harder. A little more pressure, a little more speed. Alright, so I have a coal. I'll finish this pass. Alright, so I've got a coal. I'm going to carefully pump my spindle in that hole. That acts like a plunger and forcing oxygen to it. Just helping it to coalesce and stick a little better. I'm going to tap the fireboard to free the coal. I've still got room for another coal in that spot, so that's nice. And this is burning really well. I'm not worried about this at all. So, once you have a coal, you've got a couple minutes. I've left coals for 4 or 5 minutes before, still had plenty to work with after that time. I'm going to go ahead and reset my phone. So, I'm going to pull my blanket away from my fire pit first. Alright, so I'm going to bring my tinder to my coal. That way it doesn't have very far to go. I'm going to carefully tap my coal free into my tinder bundle. Now here, just take a second. Catch your breath, breathe. Hand drill is exhausting, it's tiring, especially when you're doing the sitting method. And especially when you're a skinny guy like me doing the sitting method. So I'm just going to give it some little waves. Just feed it a little bit of oxygen. I'm turning the mouth towards the direction that it moves to make sure it's going to get a good breath with every pass. Burning pretty well. So now I can either do one of two things, or three things I guess. I could, one, put it inside a firelight and blow it to flame inside the firelight. Two, I can blow on it with my mouth to bring it to flame, or I can wave it. I'm going to do a combination of waving it and blowing, just to give it a little extra oomph. I can feel it getting warm in my hand. I can see the smoke. Smoking really good. It's burning really nice. Pick up the speed, and we've got a fire. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the fire pit and get my fire building up, and then I'll be back. Alright guys, so we got our fire going. We did so with our hand drill. Thank you very much for watching. I've really been enjoying making this video and the last one I made, where I made a set on video. If you want to learn these skills in person, if you live in the state of Kansas, you can ask me and I'm sure we can work something out. But if not, there are primitive skills practitioners all over the US and the rest of the world too that are just as good, if not better, at this than I am. That would be fantastic teachers. Among those are Cody Lundeen, Tyler White, Dave Holliday, just to name a couple. You don't need to be a big name to teach these skills either. There's a lot of nice small local schools that teach these wilderness skills. I recommend trying to find one in your area if you want to learn this stuff in person. If not, just, trial and error, man. Gather your stuff, try it out, test it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, try again. Just keep going. That's how we learn. Thanks again for watching, guys. Let me know if you want me to make another video like this, or if you want me to make one on bow drill or whatever, and I'd be happy to do so when I have some more time. I don't really care if my page gets too big, but if you do like this, go ahead and like, follow, share, whatever floats your boat, or don't. I really don't care. I just want to spread the passions that I have for fire making, and this is a pretty easy way to do it. So thanks again, guys. Have a good day.